The name Hilton today is a global synonym for luxury, a beacon of polished marble and impeccable service shining from the skylines of world capitals and exotic resorts. It represents an empire of hospitality, a testament to the ultimate realization of the American dream. But every empire, especially those that rise with such dazzling speed and brilliance, casts a long and often dark shadow. The story of the Hilton family is not merely one of business acumen and financial triumph. It is a Gothic American saga, a multi-generational epic where soaring ambition is perpetually haunted by the specters of ruin, where immense fortune is bought with a currency of personal tragedy, and where the gleaming corridors of power conceal secrets of moral compromise, fractured lives, and a corrosive legacy that passed from father to son like a cursed heirloom. This is the story of the labyrinth behind the golden door, a chronicle of the dark secrets of the Hilton family empire. Our journey begins not at a moment of triumph, but at the precipice of absolute despair. The year is 1931, and the Great Depression has sunk its teeth deep into the soul of America. On a grim, rain-swept street in El Paso, Texas, a man stands motionless, his shoulders slumped not from the weight of the water, but from the crushing burden of failure. He is Conrad Hilton, and he is staring at the padlocked doors of his own creation, the El Paso Hilton. This hotel, once a vibrant symbol of his burgeoning destiny, now stands as a silent, mocking tombstone for his aspirations. The economic plague that had ravaged the nation had found its way to his doorstep, and one by one, the properties he had acquired with such fervent hope were being seized by the cold, impersonal hands of his creditors. The vultures of finance were circling, and the dream he had painstakingly constructed, brick by agonizing brick, was collapsing into meaningless rubble. In the pocket of his worn coat, a single, carefully folded $5 bill served as a pathetic monument to his evaporated fortune. This profound moment of desolation is the true, hidden foundation of the Hilton Empire. To comprehend the glittering, impenetrable tower that would eventually pierce the clouds, one must first excavate the cracked and desperate ground upon which it was built. The ghost that would forever haunt Conrad Hilton was not merely the memory of poverty, but the visceral, blood-chilling terror of its return, a phobia that would metastasize into the ruthless, uncompromising engine of his entire life, and in turn become the primary source of his family's deepest and most enduring sorrows. To understand the man facing the abyss in El Paso, we must travel back to the sun-baked terrain of San Antonio, New Mexico territory in 1887. Conrad was born into a world of modest means, a far cry from the opulent suites that would one day bear his name. His father, Augustus Hilton, was a Norwegian immigrant, a man of stern practicality who operated a general store. His mother, Mary, was a devout Catholic of German descent, a woman whose strength of will and deep faith would imprint itself upon her son's character. The general store was Conrad's first and most formative university. Within its confines, surrounded by the smells of dry goods and fresh timber, he absorbed the fundamental rhythms of commerce. He learned the subtle art of the deal, the value of a firm handshake backed by unwavering intent, and the magnetic power of a charming smile. But he also internalized a more subtle and ultimately more corrosive lesson. He watched his father, a man content with the defined horizons of a small-town merchant, and felt within himself a restless, burning ambition that set him profoundly apart. He witnessed the hard-scrabble existence of his neighbors. There lives a constant struggle against anonymity and financial precariousness, and he developed a deep, almost pathological dread of sharing their fate. This dread would become the permanent shadow that trailed his every future success, a whisper of insufficiency that no amount of wealth could ever fully silence. This burgeoning drive manifested early. His first entrepreneurial venture, often recounted as a charming childhood anecdote, was in fact a telling portent of his future. He established a makeshift bank in a small wooden box, lending his siblings' allowance back to them with interest. While told with a chuckle in later years, this story reveals a fundamental truth about the man's psyche. From his earliest days, Conrad Hilton viewed the world not for its intrinsic value, but for its potential for leverage. He saw the ghost of a future fortune in every empty building, every casual interaction, every relationship. He carried this mindset into his early adult ventures, finding modest success with a small bank in Socorro, New Mexico. Yet, it felt infinitesimal, a mere prelude. The ghost whispered for more, louder and more insistently. The siren song of the Texas oil boom of 1919 proved irresistible. He packed his bags and headed for the riotous, dust-choked town of Cisco, Texas, a place exploding with roughnecks and wildcatters, all of them flush with cash and desperate to spend it. His target was a bank for sale. He arrived, his heart pounding with the prospect of finally seizing his defining opportunity. But fate, in a cruel twist, delivered a crushing blow. The owner, seeing the influx of wealth and demand, had dramatically increased the price. Conrad Hilton did not have the money. He was, once again, too late. The dream of the bank, the solid, respectable foundation of his fortune, evaporated before his eyes. Dejected, his spirit bruised, he sought refuge for the night at the Mobley, a 2-story red brick hotel that stood as a beacon of temporary solace in the chaotic town. What he found there was not solace, but chaos of a different kind, a madhouse. The lobby was a seething mass of humanity, men 3 deep at the front desk, loudly offering to pay exorbitant rates for an 8-hour shift in a still warm bed, a practice known as hot sheeting. The owner, sweaty and overwhelmed, was drowning in the unprecedented demand. And in that moment of profound personal disappointment, standing amid the noise and the smell of sweat and tobacco, Conrad Hilton experienced his clarifying epiphany. He wasn't standing in a bank. He was standing inside one. The real fortune, the immediate, tangible wealth, wasn't in lending money to these men. It was in housing them, in providing them with a few square feet of respite. The bank was a dead end, an abstract. The Mobley was a gold mine, a tangible, throbbing heart of commerce, with a fervor born of desperation and insight. He convinced the exhausted owner to sell. For $40,000, every cent he could scrape together, borrow, and promise, Conrad Hilton became an hotelier. He immediately applied the ruthless efficiency learned in his father's store. He installed partitions to carve more rooms from existing spaces, maximizing every inch of profitable square footage. He enforced a regime of impeccable cleanliness, understanding that in a world of grime and oil, a clean sheet was a luxury worth paying for. He became a permanent fixture in the lobby, shaking hands, learning names, making every guest feel seen. The Mobley was not just a success, it was a revelation. This was the genesis of the Hilton method, a blueprint of aggressive acquisition and obsessive operational control. But it was also the birth of the Hilton obsession. He worked 18-hour days, his life consumed by the minutiae of his enterprise. He often slept in a small, Spartan office, his ear perpetually tuned to the nocturnal sounds of the hotel, the comings and goings, the clink of glasses, the murmur of voices, the symphony of his fortune. He bought another hotel, then another, a whirlwind of ambition sweeping through Texas. He formally incorporated his growing chain as the Hilton Hotels Corporation. He was a force of nature, building his kingdom one acquisition at a time. In a bid to cement his place in society, he married Mary Barron, a beautiful and respectable woman from the world he so desperately wanted to join. They started a family with the births of Conrad, Nicky, Jr. in 1926 and William Barron in 1927. To the outside world, he was the perfect picture of the self-made American patriarch. A thriving business, a beautiful family, a future gleaming with promise. But the ghost of fear, The terror of losing it all made him a phantom in his own home. He was a distant, absent husband, his physical and emotional presence reserved for the boardroom and the lobby. His wife, Mary, raised the boys largely alone in a beautiful, but often silent house. The empire was his firstborn child, his consuming passion, his true love. His human family was a supporting cast in the grand, unfolding epic of Conrad Hilton. Then the world convulsed. The Great Depression hit, and the fragile facade of his success shattered with the force of a physical blow. The vibrant noise of travel and commerce ceased, replaced by an eerie, financially fraught silence. His beautiful hotels, once bustling centers of life, became echoing, empty palaces, their opulence now a mockery. One by one, they were wrested from his grasp. He lost his first love, the Mobley. He lost his pride and joy, the El Paso Hilton, forced to stand by and watch as the keys were handed over to men whose only currency was cold, hard debt. He was $500,000 in the red, a colossal, suffocating sum. He was losing everything. The ghost of failure was no longer a whisper from his past. It was a scream in his present ear, a shrieking harbinger of oblivion. It was in this crucible of near-total annihilation that the final, unyielding version of Conrad Hilton was forged. The charming, ambitious storekeeper's son was burned away, leaving behind a core of steel-willed survivalism. He learned to fight with a terrier's tenacity, negotiating with creditors not from a position of strength, but from a position of desperate, unbreakable will. He deployed a new language, one of pragmatic survival, convincing them that a half-empty Hilton hotel, managed with his fanatical efficiency, was still a more valuable asset than a shuttered, decaying building. He clung to a handful of properties, managing them with a microscopic attention to detail, squeezing every last cent of profit from a deeply wounded economy. Slowly, painfully, like a plant pushing through cracked concrete, he began to climb back. By the mid-1930s, he had stabilized his holdings. He had survived, but the man who emerged from the ashes of the Depression was fundamentally, irrevocably altered. The experience had confirmed his darkest, most deeply held fears about the world. It was a brutal, Darwinian arena where sentimentality was a fatal weakness, trust was a fool's gamble, and vulnerability was an invitation for destruction. The only thing that was real, the only entity that could offer protection from the abyss, was the empire itself. His personal life became the first and most consistent casualty of this newfound ruthlessness. His marriage to Mary Barron, already strained to the breaking point by his absence, crumbled completely under the weight of his serial infidelities. It was the first in a long, sorrowful procession of personal relationships that would be sacrificed on the altar of his ambition. No sooner was the ink dry on his divorce papers than he embarked on a spectacularly public, tumultuous marriage to the glamorous and vivacious Zaza Gabor. It was a union crafted for the headlines, the serious, powerful hotel king and the effervescent, witty Hollywood starlet. A perfect merger of two different kinds of American royalty. But behind the gilded doors of his suites, the reality was starkly different from the press clippings. Gabor would later recount a life of fiery, passionate arguments, of controlling behavior, and of a profound, echoing loneliness. Conrad's work remained his true wife, his paramount commitment. The birth of their daughter, Francesca, did little to mend the deep fractures in the relationship. Their divorce was a spectacular, acrimonious public spectacle, played out in the newspapers for the titillation of the masses, a grim preview of the family's future propensity for airing its most Chinese letter linen in the glaring light of public scrutiny. Each failed marriage was another brick in the formidable wall Conrad built around himself, with the Hilton Hotels Corporation standing as his only trusted, faithful companion. As his empire expanded beyond Texas, swallowing larger and more prestigious hotels, so too did the scale of the moral compromises required to sustain its growth. The acquisition of the legendary Waldorf Astoria in New York was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream, the ultimate symbol of his arrival at the very pinnacle of American society. But this crowning triumph came with a dark and troubling underside. During the feverish, paranoid climate of the McCarthy era, when accusation often served as proof, evidence suggests that Hilton Hotels, in a bid to protect its valuable brand and lucrative government contracts, quietly enforced the infamous Hollywood blacklist. The very institution famed for its open-armed hospitality was allegedly closing its doors, denying service to actors, writers, and directors deemed politically undesirable. It was a chilling decision, corporate survival chosen over moral principle, a betrayal of the very spirit of welcome upon which the business was founded. This was not an isolated incident in the shadowy annals of the empire's expansion. As Conrad pushed his brand onto the global stage, the lines between business, politics, and espionage became dangerously blurred. The construction of the Casablanca Hilton, for instance, was mired in controversy from the outset, with the land allegedly acquired through deals with a powerful Moroccan family whose recent past included ties to the Vichy regime and Nazi collaborators. Furthermore, persistent and credible rumors have swirled for decades that certain strategically located international Hilton hotels, prized for their American ownership and their status as hubs for diplomats, businessmen, and officials, were used as convenient, deniable listening posts for intelligence agencies during the Cold War. The empire of hospitality, it seemed, had learned the art of keeping state secrets, its foundations in some cases strengthened by deals made not in sunlight, but in the deepest shadows of geopolitics. While Conrad was busy building his global legacy, a profound and intimate tragedy was unfolding within the walls of his own home, a drama centered on his chosen heir. Conrad Nicky Hilton Jr., the firstborn son, was groomed from infancy to inherit the throne. Handsome, charismatic, and born into a level of wealth that insulated him from ordinary consequences, Nicky was the golden boy, the prince of the Hilton realm. But the very privilege that was meant to be his blessing became his curse. The immense, suffocating pressure to fill his father's colossal shoes, to be a worthy successor to a living legend, was more than he could bear. Instead of embracing the rigid discipline of the hotel business, Nicky rebelled with a spectacular, self-destructive fervor. He fled his father's world for the hedonistic fast lane of Hollywood, where he became a fixture on the Sunset Strip, surrounded by an entourage of starlets fueled by alcohol and a need for speed embodied in his love for race cars. His life became a stark, desperate rejection of his father's grim, workaholic discipline. The conflict between father and son became the central, painful drama of the family, a clash of two irreconcilable worlds, a battle between the man who built the gilded cage and the son who was dying inside of it. This lifelong conflict reached its devastating, very public climax in 1950, with Nicky's whirlwind marriage to the most famous woman in the world, the 18-year-old screen siren Elizabeth Taylor. It was a union that captivated the global media. American business royalty wedding Hollywood royalty. The photographs of the lavish ceremony were splashed across every magazine, a fairy tale made real. But the fairy tale was, in reality, a gothic horror story. The honeymoon, away from the flashbulbs and adoring crowds, was a nightmare. Freed from the public eye, Nicky's inner demons emerged with a vengeance. He was a compulsive gambler who would disappear for hours at the casino tables, a heavy drinker whose affability could curdle into cruelty, and he subjected his young bride to profound psychological abuse. His own resentment and deep-seated insecurities boiling over in a torrent of verbal venom. The marriage, a global spectacle of glamour, lasted a mere 207 days before it imploded. The very public unraveling exposed the rotten core beneath the Hilton family's glittering surface for all the world to see. The heir to the empire was not a king-in-waiting, but a deeply troubled, broken man being consumed by the very privilege that was supposed to define him. His life continued its downward spiral, ending in a premature, lonely death from a heart attack at the age of 42, a stark and tragic testament to the destructive power of the Hilton legacy. If Nicky was the flawed, tragic prince, his younger brother Baron was the steadfast, dutiful soldier. Where Nicky rebelled, Baron complied, but his path within the family dynasty was no less fraught with tension and quiet sorrow. After serving his country with distinction as a photographer in the Pacific Theater during World War II, an experience that provided a rare glimpse of a world outside his father's shadow, he entered the family business not as a beloved son being handed the keys to the kingdom, but as an employee who had to prove his worth from the ground up. To his credit, Baron possessed a sharp business acumen that rivaled his father's. He was an innovator, pioneering the company's expansion into airline catering and masterminding the creation of the carte blanche credit card, diversifying the empire's reach. Yet, for all his dedication and competence, he lived his professional life in a decades-long, simmering power struggle with his father. Conrad, forever haunted by the ghost of loss he had faced in El Paso, could never truly relinquish control. The empire was not just his life's work, it was his identity, his prosthetic soul. Sharing its command, even with his own capable and loyal son, felt like a form of self-annihilation. This lifelong tension revealed a heartbreaking truth that echoed through the generations. In the Hilton family, love was often conditional, measured in business utility and fiscal obedience. This bitter, complex father-son dynamic culminated in what many saw as Conrad's final, posthumous act of betrayal. Upon his death in 1979, the details of his will were revealed. To the shock of his family, his business associates, and the world at large, he had left 97% of his vast fortune, including his controlling stake in the Hilton Hotels Corporation, to the Conrad and Hilton Foundation. His children, particularly Baron, who had dedicated his entire life to stewarding and expanding the company, were effectively disinherited, left with a relative pittance. It was the ultimate, coldly logical confirmation of a lifelong suspicion. Conrad's true heirs were not his flesh and blood, but his legacy and his name, immortalized through philanthropic deeds. The ensuing legal war, with Baron mounting a bitter contest against his own father's will, was a sad, public, and deeply ironic coda to their strained relationship. A settlement was eventually reached, granting Baron a greater share, but the searing message had been delivered and received. The empire came first, last, and always. Personal bonds were secondary to the permanence of the brand. As the 20th century turned into the 21st, the Hilton name found new, unexpected, and globally pervasive life. The torch of notoriety was not passed to another hotelier or businessman, but to a young socialite who would, with stunning effectiveness, completely transform the cultural meaning of the brand itself. Paris Hilton, the great-granddaughter of Conrad, she erupted onto the global consciousness in the early 2000s as a ubiquitous, often mocked figure, the archetypal famous for being famous celebrity. But to dismiss her as a frivolous heiress is to miss the profound, darkly ironic, and deeply revealing chapter she represents in the family's ongoing saga. With her groundbreaking reality show, The Simple Life, Paris, with the clear involvement and support of her family, performed a masterful, cynical alchemy. They took the old money, establishment prestige of the Hilton name and transmuted it into a new, potent form of currency. Viral celebrity, brand endorsements, DJ contracts, and perfume lines, all fueled by calculated notoriety. She became, for a time, the new face of Hilton, a walking, talking paradox, the heiress to a global hospitality empire who became a global icon not through hotels, but through a leaked sex tape, a catchphrase that's hot, and a carefully crafted persona of vapid glamour. Yet, even in this modern reinvention, the family's dark, repetitive patterns persisted. Paris became the latest vessel for the Hilton curse, suffering under the relentless, often misogynistic glare of the media machine she helped fuel. Her recent documentary revelations of alleged psychological and physical abuse at Provo Canyon and other boarding schools where she was sent by her parents as a teenager brutally exposed the ongoing cycle of trauma and the prioritization of public image over personal well-being. The need to uphold the family name, to control and reform a rebellious heir, echoed the struggles of Nicky Hilton a half-century earlier, albeit with different tools and a different media landscape. The methods had modernized, but the underlying, tragic conflict between individual identity and the crushing demands of the dynasty remained painfully, vividly the same. Today, the empire Conrad Hilton built with such terrifying singleness of purpose is a vast, impersonal, publicly traded corporation, its operations spanning the globe. The monumental sale of virtually the entire family stake by Baron's estate marked the definitive end of an era, the final severing of the bloodline from the business it created. The Hilton Empire stands as a global behemoth, a breathtaking testament to one man's indomitable will to conquer his deepest, most primal fears. But its history is a palimpsest, and beneath the glossy, impenetrable surface of global success, the dark secrets remain etched into its very foundation. The shattered marriages, the broken heir, the moral compromises with political witch hunts and intelligence agencies, the bitter legal wars, and the intergenerational trauma that seems to echo through the decades. The story of the Hiltons is the ultimate cautionary American fable, a chilling reminder that the relentless, single-minded pursuit of a world unto oneself can, in the end, cost you the very world you hold most dear, your family, your happiness, your soul. The lights in the grand hotels still burn bright, welcoming countless guests from every corner of the globe with a promise of comfort and luxury. But they cast long, lingering shadows across the pages of history, the shadows of the ghosts that built them.